Our story begins on a shelf in the dollar store on the very edge of town. No doubt you've been there before, one late night desperate for some Bristol board. A desolate place in a plaza that used to be bustling, it became so run down that you had to double check to see if it was even still open. Inside the broken automatic doors, humming fluorescent lights illuminated row upon row of cheap plastic items. Among them was a display of colorful plastic eggs. Bright, bold lettering promised that each contained a small plastic alien figurine suspended in glittering slime. But Marshmallow, dreaming of swirling stars and galaxies, would never see the inside of a dollar store. Her egg must have fallen out from a tear in a shopping bag and rolled away, out of the parking lot, into the weeds, and out of civilization entirely. For years and years and years, it sank into the mud. The egg, of course, was oblivious to the passage of time, unaware of the city crumbling around it, or even of the rising and setting of the sun. But the petroleum that made up the plastic retained some ancient memory of its own organic origins, and the thermal reaction of the decaying matter around it manifested new life. After enough winter freezes and spring thaws, the plastic egg had become as brittle as a real egg, and the glittering slime inside had all but evaporated. In this fragile state, in the middle of a wasteland, the egg remained completely unnoticed. Until one frosty morning, a red-winged blackbird happened upon it. He was perched on a nearby reed, trying to warm himself up before continuing along on his annual migration path. It had been a particularly long, cold winter, and each year that passed only seemed to get colder, settling deep into an aging bird's bones. It was enough to make him wish that he had stayed south. Perhaps he was getting soft in his old age. He could remember a time when he was able to fly for long stretches without needing to stop and rest as often. But this new slower pace allowed him to take notice of the state of things, and he had become rather irritated with how shabby they had become. In his younger days, the yearly migration saw him soaring high over green, fertile lands. Now it was all mud and litter and dead reeds for miles and miles. The consensus among the birds that passed this way was that it was all such a terrible waste, but nothing was ever done about it. Once they migrated through, it was out of sight, out of mind. The meadow became a mudflat where nothing but weeds could ever grow, and that was the end of it. Something else for the old folks to revel in complaining about when they got together in town. But still, he secretly hoped for one last little adventure along the way, something he could brag about to the birds back home. So when the red-winged blackbird saw a glint reflected on the plastic egg's iridescent shell half submerged in the mud, he went a little mad. He became consumed with the idea that it might be the first juicy beetle of the year, a delicious bit of compensation for all his troubles. He dove for it. And so Marshmallow woke up. From inside her egg, a narrow shaft of sunlight pierced through her closed eyelids, wrenching them open for the first time. A terrible cracking sound echoed all around her. At first she thought that she must have dreamt it, but the noise persisted. Blinding light and frigid air poured in as if the drain plug had been pulled out of her peaceful dreams and were abruptly replaced with a violent pecking open of her little universe. It was all too disorienting for poor Marshmallow, who trembled inside of her egg. From her new open window, she could only make out the bird's sharp beak and talons, and she didn't much like the looks of them. With a timid voice, she called out for help. There was no response. She continued to yell, increasing her volume until she was loud enough to be heard over the commotion. Alarmed, the blackbird snapped out of his frenzied trance. "I'm terribly sorry," said a sheepish voice from outside the mutilated plastic egg. "But I am a bird, you know." Marshmallow certainly didn't know, and she was far too shaken to offer up any polite small talk in reply. It felt to her as though this bird was waiting for something. maybe some reassurances, or to be forgiven for disturbing her. What are the rules here, she wondered. Desperate to escape his faux pas, and put off by her prolonged silence, the red-winged blackbird decided that it would be best to leave without another word. With a loud flapping of his wings, the blackbird was gone, and Marshmallow was left alone. She broke open the remainder of the brittle plastic shell of her egg, punching her way through to the outside world. She looked around, trying to process her new environment, but there wasn't much to see, not really. Stretching past the horizon was an endless expanse of brown mud, broken up only by patches of dry, dead reeds. In the blackbird's haste to flee the awkward situation that he himself created, the bright red scarf he was wearing slipped off, getting tangled up in the reeds below. It was a lovely scarf, in excellent condition. In fact, the bluebird had packed it specifically for this excursion, as it was his favorite. But he couldn't go back for it now. As the bitter wind whistled across the fields, Marshmallow claimed it as her own. The moment her feet landed in the wet mud, she instantly disliked it. Combined together with the sharp wind, it was the worst discomfort that she could ever have imagined. It coated her feet, building up layers as it dried, and it became so difficult to focus on anything else. It wouldn't do to just climb back inside her egg. She wouldn't be able to fall back into that magical floating sleep. Not anymore. She would have to figure something else out. The sun was struggling hard to shine down from behind the gray clouds, and though she had hatched mere moments before, Marshmallow could sense that it was setting, and that soon she would be left in darkness. She knew deep in her rubbery soul that she couldn't stay still. More overwhelming to her than the cold or the impending night was the vastness of the open sky. It seemed more likely to swallow her up than the muddy ground. Underneath it, Marshmallow felt impossibly small. What could she do but move on? Maybe something better lay just over the next horizon. Having no previous life experiences to dissuade her, she started walking forward, one plodding step at a time. It wasn't long before Marshmallow began to tire. One foot no longer wanted to move automatically in front of the other. Mud clung onto her feet, pulling her downwards with a great force. With each step, her legs became impossibly heavy. The effort of walking was excruciating, but still she kept pushing herself forward. Or rather, she kept pulling herself forward and out of the unstable ground as she went. Her legs seemed to catch fire and turn to lead all at once, and she was certain that they were about to give out from under her. She started to wonder if it wouldn't be better to give in to the mud, to stop fighting against it. What would happen, she mused wearily as the ice ripped into her lungs, if I just let myself sink down? Marshmallow closed her eyes. She let her arms fall down to her sides, and she relaxed her shoulders. She was so very tired. She thought back fondly to her life inside the plastic egg, before she had been so unceremoniously awakened by the blackbird. She had been safe and peaceful inside her dreams, suspended in a swirling cosmic goo. How nice it would be to return there, no longer freezing and struggling and exposed to the elements. Perhaps that's what awaited her deep in the mud, if she let go. She imagined that it might actually be quite warm and soft once you got past the initial shock of wet mud on the skin. Maybe almost comfortable. She wondered how deep the mud would take her. But she didn't sink far at all, barely down to her knees. Just as she had given up, the sun managed to peek out from behind the clouds at last. It was only for a moment, a little parting gift of hopeful light on its way into evening, but the brief warmth changed Marshmallow's outlook completely. It was something entirely new, and she was surprised with the realization that her discomfort had only been temporary. This good feeling, however fleeting, was most certainly what she had been chasing. The sun disappeared behind a cloud, chilling her body, but not extinguishing her resolve. She rose up, pulling her legs out of the mud with a great squelch, and lifted her eyes up to the horizon once more. As she did, she beheld a strange structure rising up from out of the mud. She had been so focused on her own despair that she hadn't initially noticed it at all, until it was right in front of her. It was a man-made bridge, a culvert drain, something you've all driven past and over 1,000 times, a deceptively unremarkable feature in any roadside ditch. But Marshmallow had never seen such a thing before. As the sun set behind it, reflecting upon the rusted metal and rock, Marshmallow noted to herself that it was the first beautiful thing she had ever seen. The bridge sat alone in the middle of the mud, and for the life of her, Marshmallow could not figure out what purpose it served, or if it had ever served a purpose at all. The bridge was so isolated that it was removed from all context. She could only stare at it in wonder, though her considerations ceased when cold splashes of rain began to fall from the darkening sky. She ran underneath the bridge's tunnel for shelter, and of course, to get a better look. Grateful for the roof overhead and drained of energy from her harrowing journey through the mud, Marshmallow made herself as comfortable as she could. The dirt floor was mercifully drier and more solid than the ground outside. She carefully folded up her scarf, using it to cushion her head as a pillow. The rhythmic patter of raindrops on the tunnel and the settling darkness made her eyelids heavy, and eventually she drifted off to sleep. In the wee hours of the morning, a great rumbling shook the ground. It rattled the metal walls of the makeshift shelter, echoing eerily down the dark tunnel. Marshmallow awoke, confused, not remembering where it was she had lain her head just hours before. She could see nothing, but the rumbling was getting louder, as if something huge was moving towards her. Panicked, she crawled over to the open entrance to investigate. It was the spring thaw coming down from far-off mountains to the north, bringing the river back with it. Marshmallow was swept up and nearly washed away in a wall of water, but the freezing flood jolted her into action. Once again, she had no choice but to keep moving or be lost forever. With great effort, she pulled herself up to the newly formed riverbank and up the stones of the bridge. Weary and very nearly frozen through, Marshmallow sat on the ledge atop the tunnel. She wondered what else she might have to survive tonight, and whether the floodwaters would rise up any higher. She looked down at the rushing river, relieved to be alive and out of the churning waters below. She managed to retrieve her scarf before it was washed away forever. It was a small, scavenged victory. It hardly seemed to matter, though. She just wanted to dry off and get back to sleep. Out of the corner of her eye, Marshmallow noticed a purple curtain along the stone wall behind her, billowing in the rainy night and beckoning her closer. The drapery concealed a doorway hidden among the stones, which led into a little cave. It wasn't a very big room, but it was much safer than being out in the open, and was a good opportunity to get out of the pouring rain. It felt to Marshmallow that this place was meant to offer shelter, and so she obliged. Perhaps it was a refuge for other muddy wanderers. Waiting inside was a lantern, a crate of supplies, and some bedding, which is what interested our little green heroine the most. It was certainly better equipped than her little plastic egg, now likely being washed out to sea. The enveloping stone walls served to muffle the thunderous sounds of the rain and the river, as if they were much too far away to worry about. Wrapped up tightly in her new blanket, exhaustion finally defeated her fear and uncertainty. She had no more energy to worry about what new unfathomable dangers could potentially sweep her away next. She slept and slept and slept and slept. It was a deep, regenerative sleep that lasted for days, maybe even for weeks. Marshmallow rested and germinated in the stillness of her dark little room until one day, when her body had finally healed, she was quite delicate and newly hatched after all, a ray of warm spring sunshine came streaming through a crack in the stone and coaxed her awake. It was not a violent awakening, like when she had been forced to hatch, but rather a gentle dawning in a sturdier, more comfortable home. Peeking out of her little stone doorway, Marshmallow was astonished. She rubbed her eyes, trying to adjust them to the daylight. While she had been sleeping, the world had come to life. The once barren, muddy fields that she had struggled to cross were completely transformed. Gone were the colorless fields of nothing that had stretched out past the horizon. Gone were the dismal gray skies. The warm sunshine had been like a magic spell, and the once dry riverbed teemed with activity. It was here on the old bridge, now able to serve its actual purpose by spanning a busy waterway, that Marshmallow's adventures truly began.